I've been married to Alex for 9 years, and I can honestly say we've had a good life together. He's loving, supportive, and always has my back, except when it comes to one thing. His sister, Melanie. She's 3 years older than Alex and has been a constant thorn in my side since the beginning of our relationship. When Alex first introduced me to Melanie, I was genuinely excited. She came across as this confident, outgoing woman who loved her family and had a great sense of humor. I thought we'd get along perfectly. For the first couple of months it even seemed like we did. She was warm and friendly, and I really believed we were building the kind of relationship you'd see in movies. Sisters-in-law who became best friends. But then the cracks started to show. It began with little comments. They were subtle enough that I didn't catch on right away. Melanie would say things like, "Oh, you're so brave to wear that color." Or, "I didn't know people still did their hair like that." It didn't feel overtly cruel, just off. I'd laugh it off, thinking she was joking. I told myself this is just Melanie's sense of humor. She doesn't mean anything by it. But the comments didn't stop. In fact, they started happening more often and became more pointed. Melanie would criticize the way I cooked, even though Alex loved my cooking. She'd nitpick how I decorated our apartment, going as far as to say my taste was juvenile in front of Alex's parents. She'd even throw in little jabs about my career, making sure to mention how hard she worked compared to me, as if my job wasn't demanding. The worst part? She did all of this with a smile, in a way that made her look like she was just trying to be helpful or playful. If anyone ever tried to call her out, she'd act completely shocked, like she had no idea she'd done anything wrong. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," she'd say with wide eyes and a pout. "You're so sensitive." Alex noticed her behavior, and to his credit, he didn't ignore it. He'd step in when she crossed a line, but his approach was always gentle. "Come on, Mel, that's enough," he'd say, or, "You're being a little harsh, don't you think?" It was like he wanted to keep the peace more than actually address the problem. I appreciated that he tried, but it was never enough to make Melanie stop. The tipping point came before our wedding. Melanie stopped pretending to be subtle and went straight for sabotage. One night, she sat Alex down and told him he was making a huge mistake by marrying me. She told him I wasn't the right woman for him, and that if he just trusted her, she could find him someone better. She even had the audacity to name specific women she thought would be a better match. When Alex told me what she'd said, I was furious. I couldn't believe she would go that far. I asked him if he had defended me, and he just shrugged and said, "That's just Melanie. She's protective. She'll come around." I was stunned. How could he be so calm about this? She wasn't being protective. She was being manipulative. I tried to let it go, telling myself that once we were married, Melanie would have to accept that I wasn't going anywhere. I thought maybe she'd finally back off and focus on her own life. But I couldn't have been more wrong. After the wedding, it was like Melanie saw our marriage as a challenge. She doubled down on her efforts to make me feel unwelcome in their family. Melanie would show up uninvited to our home, criticizing everything from the furniture to the way I kept the place clean. She'd make comments about how Alex deserved better, and then laugh it off like it was a joke. At family events, she'd bring up stories about Alex's ex-girlfriends, going on and on about how amazing they were. She even once accidentally referred to one of his exes as the one that got away. Alex always tried to keep the peace, but his efforts felt half-hearted. He'd tell Melanie to stop, but it was clear he didn't want to escalate things. He'd tell me, "You know how she is. She's just trying to get under your skin. Don't let her." But how was I supposed to ignore someone who went out of her way to make me feel small at every opportunity? 9 years later, nothing has changed. If anything, Melanie has gotten worse. Feels like she sees me as some kind of competition, though I have no idea why. It's not like I'm trying to take her place in Alex's life. I've tried talking to her, but every time I bring up her behavior, she either denies it or turns it around on me, acting like I'm the one with the problem. And Alex? He still tries to play mediator, but I can tell he's exhausted by it all. I know he loves me, but his loyalty to Melanie is a blind spot. He always says, "She's my sister and I can't just cut her off." I'm not asking him to cut her off, but I do wish he'd stand up for me more firmly. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have seen the red flags sooner. Maybe I should have set firmer boundaries with Melanie from the start. Or maybe I should have pushed Alex to take a stronger stance with her. But hindsight doesn't change the fact that I'm stuck in this situation now, dealing with a sister-in-law who seems determined to make my life miserable. It's been 9 years of this, and I'm not sure how much more I can take. The wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, but Melanie made sure to leave her mark on it, and not in a good way. We'd gone all out to make the event beautiful. The theme was soft and elegant. Pastel colors, delicate florals, and an overall romantic vibe. Everyone had been informed of the dress code, and most guests showed up in light, airy outfits that perfectly fit the mood of the day. But of course Melanie decided to stand out. When she arrived, my heart sank. She walked in wearing a floor-length black gown with a matching black veil that gave her the appearance of someone attending a funeral. It was striking, deliberate, and entirely inappropriate. Heads turned as she made her dramatic entrance, and I could feel the tension ripple through the room. I tried to brush it off at first. I told myself it wasn't worth ruining the day over her antics. But Melanie wasn't just content to make a statement with her outfit. She wanted attention, lots of it. She began loudly telling anyone who would listen how much she missed Alex, as though I had stolen him away from her. "It's like I've lost my brother," she said with a mournful sigh to one of Alex's cousins. "He's not just hers now, is he? I barely recognize him anymore." At first I thought maybe she'd stop after a few comments, but she kept going. Over dinner, she managed to steer every conversation back to how much she'd sacrificed for Alex growing up, and how sad she was to see him move on. It was like she was trying to paint herself as some kind of tragic figure, the sister who had been abandoned. I could see the discomfort on people's faces as they tried to politely change the subject or redirect her attention. But Melanie wouldn't let it go. She even found my maid of honor at one point and dramatically whispered, "You'll never understand how hard this is for me. Losing Alex is like losing a part of myself." By the time we moved on to the speeches, Melanie had amped things up even further. She actually interrupted Alex's father during his toast to interject with her own little anecdote about their childhood. It had nothing to do with the speech, and it was clearly just another excuse to pull focus. When she finally sat down, she didn't look embarrassed. She looked pleased with herself. The final straw came during the dancing. She sulked on the sidelines while everyone else had a great time. At one point she walked onto the dance floor, where Alex and I were having a moment, and tried to pull him into a solo dance with her. I couldn't believe the audacity. Alex politely declined, but the damage was done. Everyone could see how out of line she was. By the end of the night, even Alex's parents, who usually tried to downplay Melanie's behavior, had had enough. I overheard his mom whispering to his dad about how humiliating her behavior had been. Finally, his dad took her aside and told her she needed to leave. Melanie didn't take it well. She caused a bit of a scene, loudly insisting she had every right to be here, and that she wasn't going to be kicked out like a criminal. But Alex's mom stood firm, and eventually Melanie left, muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. I wish I could say her departure brought some relief, but the damage was already done. My friends and family were polite about it, but I could tell they were appalled by her behavior. Alex was mortified. He spent the rest of the evening apologizing to me and trying to salvage the mood, but it wasn't the wedding I dreamed of. Looking back, I don't know why I thought Melanie would respect our big day. She'd been undermining me from the start, so it was naive to think she'd suddenly play nice just because it was a wedding. But I guess a part of me had hoped she'd surprise me. Instead, she made it crystal clear that she wasn't going to let me have the spotlight, not even for one day. After the chaos of our wedding, life settled into a rhythm, though Melanie was never far from causing trouble. For a while, I thought maybe things had reached their worst and she'd eventually move on. But Melanie had a way of resurfacing, always finding new ways to stir up drama. A few years after we got married, Melanie went through a heartbreaking miscarriage. When Alex and I found out, we both agreed to put the past aside and be there for her. No one deserves to go through that kind of pain alone. Alex spent a lot of time checking in on her, and I tried to be as supportive as I could. I sent her thoughtful messages, invited her over for dinners, and even made a point to talk about her feelings whenever she needed someone to listen. At first, it seemed like the tragedy had changed her. She was more open, less confrontational, and even genuinely kind at times. She began spending time with our son Jack, who was a toddler by then. Seeing her play with him gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could finally have a normal relationship. She doted on Jack, bringing him little gifts, and showing a softer side of herself that I hadn't seen before. For a brief moment, I let my guard down. I thought, this is it. She's finally letting go of all that resentment. But of course, Melanie couldn't help herself. It wasn't long before the cracks in her behavior began to show again. It started with subtle comments, the kind of things that made me pause but not outright react. She'd say things like, "Jack looks so different from Alex when he was a baby." Or, "I can't believe how blonde he is. No one else in the family has hair like that." I brushed it off, thinking she was just making small talk. But then she got bolder. One evening, while Alex and I were hosting a family dinner, Melanie made a comment that stopped me in my tracks. She casually turned to Alex and said, "Doesn't it ever bother you how much Jack looks like one of her co-workers? What's his name again?" "Ryan." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Ryan was a colleague I'd mentioned a handful of times in passing, mostly because he was part of my team at work. There was nothing remotely inappropriate about my interactions with him, but Melanie had somehow twisted that into ammunition. Alex's face immediately darkened. "What are you talking about, Melanie?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Oh, nothing," she said with a smirk. "It's probably just me. You know how I notice little things like that." The room went silent, and I felt my cheeks flush with a mix of anger and humiliation. I wanted to scream at her, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. After the dinner, I confronted Alex. "You don't believe her, do you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Of course not," he said, pulling me into a hug. "You know how Melanie is. She's just stirring the pot." But even as he reassured me, I couldn't help but notice the way he avoided looking directly at me. Melanie's words had planted a seed of doubt, and no matter how irrational it was, I could tell it had taken root. From that point on, Melanie ramped up her efforts. She'd make offhand comments whenever she was around Alex, always laced with just enough venom to sting. "I saw Ryan at the grocery store the other day," she'd say. "Such a nice guy. You must really enjoy working with him." Or, "Jack's so smart. I guess he gets that from both sides." Or maybe just one. It was exhausting. No matter how much I tried to ignore her, her words started to chip away at me. And the worst part, I could feel Alex pulling back, even if he didn't realize it. He never outright accused me of anything, but he'd ask more questions about my day, or seem unusually interested in my work schedule. I hated that Melanie's poison was affecting our marriage, but every time I brought it up, Alex would say the same thing. "She's just being Melanie. Don't let her get to you." I reached my breaking point when Melanie made her most audacious move yet. She pulled Alex aside during a family gathering and outright told him she had heard things about me at work. According to her, I was spending an awful lot of time with Ryan, and people were starting to notice. Alex confronted me later that night, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "Did something happen between you and Ryan?" he asked, his voice low. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "No, Alex. Of course not. Why would you even ask me that?" "Melanie's been saying things," he admitted. I didn't want to believe her, but she's so insistent. I was furious. "She's lying, Alex. She's been lying about me for years and you know it. How can you let her get into your head like this?" He didn't have an answer. The damage was done. Even though he eventually apologized and said he believed me, I couldn't shake the feeling that Melanie had succeeded in driving a wedge between us. It was devastating. I'd tried so hard to be understanding after her miscarriage, to give her the benefit of the doubt, and rebuild our relationship. But she'd taken that kindness and weaponized it against me, using her proximity to Alex and Jack to sow seeds of distrust. I didn't know how much longer I could handle her in our lives, but one thing was clear. Melanie wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, whatever that was. A few years after Jack was born, we started talking seriously about having another child. Life wasn't perfect, especially with Melanie's constant meddling, but we felt ready to grow our family. When I found out I was pregnant, we decided to keep it a secret until the second trimester. We wanted the announcement to be special, and Alex's 38th birthday felt like the perfect occasion. We planned a small gathering with family and close friends, Just a relaxed dinner at our home. Alex was thrilled about the pregnancy and couldn't wait to share the news. When the time came, we stood in front of everyone, and Alex said, "I couldn't ask for a better birthday gift. We're excited to tell you all that we're expecting another baby." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. My mother-in-law hugged me tightly, already talking about knitting baby clothes, and Alex's dad beamed with pride. Even Jack got in on the excitement, running around the room telling everyone he was going to be a big brother. But as I looked around the room, I noticed one face that wasn't smiling: Melanie's. She sat stiffly in her chair, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes gave her away. She looked indignant, almost offended, like our pregnancy announcement was some kind of personal insult. She didn't say much during the initial wave of congratulations, just offered a tight-lipped smile and a perfunctory, "That's great news." I tried not to let her reaction bother me. After all, everyone else seemed genuinely happy for us, and I wasn't going to let her sour attitude ruin such a special moment. As the evening went on, Melanie seemed to shift gears. She started acting unusually nice, which immediately put me on edge. This was Melanie we were talking about. She didn't do nice without an ulterior motive. She came up to me at one point and said, "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we've had our differences, but I want to let bygones be bygones. We're family after all." Her tone was soft, almost sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, I smiled and nodded, not wanting to cause a scene. A little while later, she came over again, this time holding a plate of food. "Here," she said, handing it to me. "I noticed you haven't eaten much. I thought I'd get you something." I was surprised, to say the least. Melanie had never gone out of her way to be thoughtful toward me before. For a brief moment, I wondered if she was genuinely trying to make peace. But then I looked down at the plate and froze. There were shrimp on it. I'm severely allergic to shrimp, something Melanie has known for years. It's not a small allergy either. Even a tiny bit could send me into anaphylactic shock. My heart started racing as I stared at the plate. Was this a mistake? Or was it deliberate? I glanced up at her, trying to read her expression. She was smiling, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach twist. "I hope you like it," she said casually, as if she hadn't just handed me a plate of food that could literally kill me. "Thanks," I said slowly, setting the plate down on the nearest table. "But I think I'll stick to what's already on my plate." Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Suit yourself," she said, and walked away. I couldn't focus for the rest of the evening. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it an innocent mistake? Or was it Melanie's way of sending a message? Alex noticed my mood and asked if everything was okay. But I didn't want to ruin his birthday by bringing it up, so I just said I was feeling a little tired. Later that night, after everyone had left and we were cleaning up, I told Alex what had happened. He frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. "She knows about your allergy," he said. "She's always known." "Exactly," I said. "So why would she bring me a plate with shrimp on it? It doesn't make sense." "Maybe she just forgot," he offered, but even as he said it, I could tell he wasn't convinced. "She doesn't forget things like that," I said. "This is Melanie we're talking about." Alex didn't have an answer. We finished cleaning up in silence, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that Melanie had done it on purpose, and the thought made my skin crawl. The worst part was knowing that I couldn't prove anything. If I confronted her, she'd just play innocent, acting shocked that I'd even suggest such a thing. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize," she'd say, all wide-eyed and offended. And if I tried to explain it to anyone else, they'd probably think I was overreacting. But I knew. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was Melanie being Melanie. Manipulative, vindictive, and willing to go to any lengths to make me feel unsafe in my own family. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder. If she was willing to do something like this now, what would she do once the baby was actually here? After that unsettling birthday dinner, Alex and I tried to convince ourselves it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe Melanie had genuinely forgotten about my allergy. I didn't trust her, but even I hesitated to accuse her of something so deliberate without evidence. Still, the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The situation took a terrifying turn a few days later when Melanie's husband, Jason, inadvertently confirmed my worst fears. We'd been invited to another family dinner at Alex's parents' house. I wasn't thrilled about seeing Melanie again so soon, but I wasn't going to let her dictate my life. Besides, Jason was always kind to me. He often seemed as frustrated with Melanie's behavior as the rest of us, though he never spoke about it directly. As we sat down to eat, Melanie walked in with a plate she had apparently prepared herself. She made a big show of bringing it directly to me, saying, "I know you didn't eat much last time, so I made sure to get this just right for you." Her voice was saccharine, almost sickly sweet, and I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. Before I could say anything, Jason leaned over and said, "Hey, I love shrimp. If you're not hungry, I'll take it." I tried to protest, but Melanie interrupted, her smile tight. "Oh, come on, I made it for her. Don't be greedy." Jason laughed and shrugged. "She doesn't seem too excited about it, and I really do love shrimp. No harm, right?" Without waiting for a response, he grabbed the plate and started eating. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I wouldn't have to deal with whatever was on that plate, and dread because something didn't feel right about the whole situation. It didn't take long for the nightmare to unfold. Jason had barely finished his first few bites when he suddenly started coughing. At first it seemed like maybe he'd swallowed wrong, but the coughing quickly turned into choking. His face turned red, and he grabbed at his throat, gasping for air. "Jason," Melanie said, her voice high-pitched and panicked. Everyone froze for a moment before Alex jumped up and yelled for someone to call 911. Jason's coughing turned into retching, and then he collapsed unconscious. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like an eternity. They worked on Jason right there in the dining room, eventually stabilizing him enough to rush him to the hospital. Meanwhile, the rest of us sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Later that night, we got a call from the hospital. Jason was going to be okay, but the doctors had some shocking news. The food he ate had been poisoned. It wasn't just bad shrimp or an allergic reaction. Someone had deliberately tampered with it. The police were called, and an investigation began. They came to Alex's parents' house the next day, asking questions and collecting evidence. My in-laws were horrified, but they were determined to get to the bottom of it. They suggested reviewing the security footage from the cameras they'd recently installed outside and inside the house. I didn't think the cameras would reveal much, but when the footage was played back, my blood ran cold. There, clear as day, was Melanie in the kitchen, carefully preparing the plate of food she had brought to me. At one point, she glanced over her shoulder, then pulled a small vial out of her purse and sprinkled something onto the shrimp. The room went silent as we watched the scene unfold. Alex's parents looked like they'd been slapped in the face. His mom started crying, and his dad's hands were trembling as he paused the video. Melanie, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You don't even know what that is. It could have been salt or seasoning or anything. I didn't poison anyone." Her defense was weak and she knew it. The police weren't convinced, and neither was anyone else in the room. Jason, still recovering in the hospital, was notified of the discovery, and he was furious. "Why would you do this, Melanie?" Alex asked, his voice breaking. "Why would you try to hurt her, or anyone?" Melanie crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "I didn't do anything. This is just a big misunderstanding. You're all ganging up on me like you always do." It was almost impressive how quickly she managed to turn herself into the victim, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. The police took her in for questioning, and while she didn't outright confess, her story kept changing. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that my instincts had been right, fear about what could have happened if Jason hadn't taken that plate, and anger that Melanie had been willing to go to such lengths to hurt me. The fallout from the incident was immediate and devastating. Alex was shattered, caught between his love for his sister and the horrifying reality of what she'd done. His parents were beside themselves with grief and shame, struggling to come to terms with the fact that their daughter had tried to poison someone, at a family dinner no less. And me, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to eating that food. If Jason hadn't stepped in, I might not have been alive to tell the story. It was a chilling reminder of just how far Melanie was willing to go, and it left me questioning whether I'd ever feel safe around her again. One thing was clear: Melanie's mask had finally slipped, and there was no pretending anymore. In the days following the poisoning incident, everything unraveled. Melanie's initial denials didn't hold up under pressure, and after hours of questioning, she finally cracked. I wasn't present when she confessed, but Alex told me the chilling details later. She admitted to putting poison in the food, and the reason left everyone in disbelief: jealousy. Melanie was outraged that Alex and I had stolen her moment by announcing our pregnancy at his birthday dinner. She revealed that she had been planning to announce her own pregnancy at the same gathering, but felt overshadowed and humiliated when we shared our news first. I couldn't stand seeing her so happy, Melanie had said, according to Alex. She's taken everything from me: my brother, my family's attention, and now this. It was supposed to be my moment. Hearing that made me feel sick. I'd spent years trying to navigate her manipulations, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. She hadn't just lashed out with words or petty sabotage. She'd deliberately tried to harm me, to take me out of the picture entirely. When Jason heard her confession, he was livid. He filed for divorce almost immediately, making it clear he wanted nothing more to do with her. He also worked closely with the police, determined to ensure she faced consequences for her actions. The legal process moved quickly, given the overwhelming evidence against Melanie. Between the surveillance footage, the toxicology report, and her own confession, there wasn't much room for debate. The trial was swift, and Melanie was sentenced to several years in prison for attempted poisoning and endangering lives. The day of her sentencing was surreal. Part of me felt a grim sense of relief, knowing she couldn't hurt me or my family anymore. But another part of me felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Despite everything she'd done, Melanie was still Alex's sister, and seeing him so broken over the situation was heartbreaking. He didn't attend her sentencing. He couldn't bring himself to, but I could tell he carried the weight of her choices like a heavy burden. After Melanie was taken away, it was like a dark cloud had finally lifted from our lives. The constant tension, the manipulative games, the never-ending drama, it all disappeared with her. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Jason stayed in touch with us for a while, mostly to check in and update us on his own life. He was moving on, focusing on his career, and rebuilding after the chaos Melanie had brought into his world. He told us that despite everything, he was grateful to have gotten out before things got even worse. As for Alex, he struggled for a long time to come to terms with what had happened. He went through phases of anger, guilt, and sadness, wondering if there was something he could have done differently to prevent Melanie's spiral. It took a lot of conversations and reassurances to help him see that her actions were entirely her own. Jack, thankfully, was too young to fully understand the situation. We told him that his aunt had to go away for a while, and he accepted it without much fuss. As he got older, we decided to be honest with him about what had happened, but for now, we wanted to protect his innocence. Years passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Alex and I welcomed our second child, a beautiful baby girl, and our family felt complete. We created a happy, peaceful home for our kids, free from the chaos that had defined so much of our early years together. As for Melanie, she faded from our lives. She never tried to contact us from prison, and no one in the family seemed eager to bring her up in conversation. It was as if everyone collectively agreed to move on, to focus on healing, and leave the pain behind. Looking back, I'm still shocked by how far she was willing to go. Her jealousy and bitterness nearly destroyed my family, but in the end, her actions only solidified my bond with Alex. We faced something unimaginable together, and came out stronger on the other side. Melanie's absence is a reminder of the damage unchecked resentment can cause, but it's also a reminder of how resilient love and family can be in the face of even the darkest challenges. A few months after Melanie's trial, amidst the aftermath of all that had happened, a bright spot emerged in our lives. Sophie was born, a beautiful, healthy baby girl who instantly became the heart of our family. Jack, who was 6 at the time, was over the moon about being a big brother. He'd spent weeks leading up to her birth drawing pictures of their future adventures together, and practicing how to gently hold a baby. When he finally met her, the way his little face lit up made every hardship we'd faced feel worth it. Sophie's arrival marked the start of a new chapter for us. After everything with Melanie, our family had been through the ringer, but holding my daughter in my arms reminded me of all the good we still had in our lives. Alex and I had grown closer in the aftermath of Melanie's betrayal, finding strength in each other as we navigated the storm. Jason remained a steady presence in our lives, even after divorcing Melanie. I think part of him needed the closure that came from staying connected with us, a way to process everything that had happened. He'd often stop by to visit, and Jack loved having someone else to play with. But every time I saw Jason, I felt a pang of guilt. I couldn't shake the memory of him collapsing at the dinner table, gasping for air. Even though I hadn't handed him that plate or poisoned the food, I still felt responsible in some twisted way. I'd apologized countless times, but Jason always brushed it off. "Stop beating yourself up about it," he said during one visit. "If it hadn't been me, it could have been you. Honestly, I'm glad I was the one to take that plate. You've got kids to think about, and I'd rather it be me than you not being here for them." His words were kind, but they didn't erase the lingering ache in my chest. Still, I was grateful for his forgiveness and the fact that he hadn't let what Melanie did sour his relationship with us. Moving forward wasn't easy. What Melanie had done left a scar that wasn't visible but felt ever present. Every now and then, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder or second-guessing people's intentions, wondering if there was more malice hiding behind friendly faces. Alex carried his own share of the burden, grappling with the pain of what his sister had become. Despite the lingering trauma, we were determined not to let it define us. The support of family and friends was a lifeline. My in-laws, devastated by Melanie's actions, threw themselves into being doting grandparents to Jack and Sophie, doing everything they could to make up for the pain their daughter had caused. My own family rallied around us too, constantly reminding us that we weren't alone. Life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. Sophie grew quickly, her laugh filling the house and reminding me of how much joy still existed in the world. Jack took his role as big brother seriously, always eager to help out and protect her. Alex and I worked on strengthening our relationship, finding comfort in each other as we moved past the chaos Melanie had brought into our lives. There are still moments when the memories resurface, sharp and painful. But when they do, I remind myself of everything we've gained. A stronger bond with each other, a family filled with love, and a renewed appreciation for the life we've built. This chapter of our story isn't defined by Melanie's actions. It's defined by how we overcame them, how we found light in the darkness, and how we learned to cherish the people who truly matter. We've come a long way, and though the journey hasn't been easy, I know we're stronger for it. With Sophie in our arms, Jack by our side, and the unwavering support of our loved ones, I finally feel like we've closed the door on that painful chapter and stepped into a brighter, happier future.